Every town has its stories, whispers that creep into the corners of your mind when you're alone in the dark. But Staten Island's story was different. It wasn't just a campfire tale or a warning to keep kids from wandering too far. It was real. At least, that's what people said. The legend of Cropsey began like most urban legends do, passed down from older kids to the younger ones, told in hushed voices during sleepovers or while exploring the shadowy edges of the neighborhood. It was said that Cropsey was a man, maybe once normal, but twisted by madness and time. Some claimed he had been a patient at the infamous Willowbrook State School, a place with a history too dark to ignore. Others believed he was a former employee, driven insane by the horrors he had witnessed behind those locked doors. No matter which version you heard, one thing was certain: Cropsey was out there, lurking in the woods, watching, waiting. The stories all described him the same way: a tall, gaunt figure with a hook for a hand, his face hidden beneath a tattered hood. They said he would sneak into houses at night, snatching children from their beds, leaving nothing behind but open windows and the faint sound of rustling leaves. At first, it was easy to dismiss as just another ghost story. But then, the disappearances began. Children would vanish without a trace, their last known whereabouts often near the abandoned buildings of Willowbrook. Parents would search desperately, calling their names into the night, their voices trembling with fear. Some claimed to have seen him, a shadow moving through the trees, the glint of metal in the moonlight. But by the time anyone got close, he was already gone. The police launched investigations, combing through the dense undergrowth surrounding the asylum, but they found nothing. No footprints, no signs of struggle, just silence. The legend grew stronger with each missing child, and soon, Cropsey wasn't just a story anymore. He was a living nightmare, a phantom that haunted Staten Island. For years, parents warned their children not to wander too far, to stay out of the woods after dark. But kids are curious, drawn to the thrill of the unknown. And Cropsey was always waiting. Some who ventured too close to the ruins of Willowbrook returned with tales of strange noises, whispers in the wind, the feeling of being watched, and shadows that didn't belong. Others never came back at all. Then, in the 1980s, the terror took on a new face. A man named Andre Rand was arrested in connection with the disappearances. He was a drifter, with a dark past and an unsettling presence. The authorities believed he was responsible for at least some of the missing children. But even after his conviction, the fear didn't end. People whispered that he wasn't acting alone, that Cropsey was still out there, watching from the shadows, biding his time. Despite Rand's imprisonment, sightings of Cropsey continued. Hikers reported seeing a figure standing motionless in the distance, his eyes glowing in the darkness. The ruins of Willowbrook became a place of pilgrimage for thrill-seekers and ghost hunters, but few stayed long. The air around the asylum was thick with something wrong. A feeling of unease that clung to you like a cold sweat. Even today, the legend persists. Locals say you can still hear the faint echo of children's laughter drifting through the trees at night, followed by the slow, deliberate scrape of something sharp against the pavement. They warn newcomers to stay away from the woods, to never go looking for Cropsey, because if you do, he might just find you first. So, is Cropsey just an urban legend? A tale spun to scare misbehaving kids? Or is he something more, something that has been lurking in the shadows for decades, feeding on fear, waiting for his next victim? Some stories are meant to be forgotten. Some places should be left alone. But Staten Island will always remember Cropsey. And so will those who never came back. In the forgotten corners of Eastern Europe, nestled deep in the mist-covered forests of Serbia, there stood a village named Kiseljevo. Its cobblestone streets had long since been overtaken by weeds and creeping vines, its houses standing as hollow, crumbling relics of a time when life once bloomed in the land. Yet, this was no ordinary village. The very air seemed to carry with it an ancient evil, an evil that had taken root in Kiseljevo long before anyone had realized it. The legend of Petar Blagojevic had been passed down through generations, but few believed it. It was a story told by the old, the ones whose memories were heavy with sorrow, as they recounted tales of long-forgotten horrors. They spoke of a man, a farmer's son, who had once lived among them. Petar Blagojevic, they said, had been a man like any other. His tall, muscular frame and fair, sun-kissed skin made him popular among the women. He had a gentle smile, and to those who knew him, a heart of gold. But beneath his facade of charm lay something dark, something sinister. Petar was different. He avoided the sunlight, rarely seen outside during the day. His house was always shuttered, the curtains drawn tight as if he were hiding from the world. At night, the villagers could hear strange noises coming from his house, soft whispers that sounded almost like a chant, a murmur carried on the wind. But the most unsettling thing of all was his eyes. When anyone looked into them, they saw something that made their skin crawl. It was as if Petar was not fully there. His gaze would pierce through you, cold and unblinking, as if he were staring at something far beyond the living world. As time passed, strange events began to unfold in Kiseljevo. The first death came quietly, almost without warning. Luka, a young shepherd boy, had been found in the hills, his body drained of life. His face was pale, his lips a sickly shade of blue, and on his neck were two small puncture marks, perfectly round, as if made by some sharp, monstrous fawn. No marks of a struggle, no sign of an attacker, just the marks of death. At first, the villagers dismissed the incident. It was an animal, they said, a wolf, a bear. But more deaths soon followed. A week later, a father of 3 was found in his barn, his body cold and lifeless, 2 puncture wounds on his neck. The villagers were no longer able to deny the pattern, and whispers began to spread like wildfire. One by one, the victims fell. A young woman, about to be married, was found in her cottage, her fiancé beside her, both of them drained of life. The village priest, who had prayed for the souls of the fallen, was discovered on the church altar, a pool of blood staining the stone floor beneath him. His neck was marked, and his eyes had been wide open, frozen in terror. The fear that gripped Kiseljevo was palpable. The villagers could no longer ignore the terror that had crept into their lives. They turned to their elder, a man named Marko, who had lived through the dark days of war and had witnessed countless horrors in his youth. He had heard the stories, but even he had hoped they were nothing more than superstition. But when the deaths continued, Marko knew that something far more sinister was at play. Gathering the remaining villagers, he told them the horrifying truth. "The monster among us," he said, his voice trembling, "is no ordinary killer. It is Petar Blagojevic. He is no longer a man. He is a vampire." The villagers recoiled in disbelief. "But he's one of us," they protested. Petar was never violent, he was never cruel. He was a farmer, a good man. Marko's face darkened as he recounted the legend. "I remember the stories my grandmother used to tell me. Petar Blagojevic was cursed, doomed to walk the earth forever, feeding on the blood of the living. His death wasn't a death at all. He was buried, yes, but not truly gone. His soul, trapped in eternal torment, would return to the village, feeding on us one by one. Petar, Marko explained, had died years ago. In his final moments, consumed by his insatiable thirst for blood, he had been staked through the heart by his own father, a farmer who had seen the monstrous transformation in his son. But the blood of the vampire had seeped into the soil, and the curse had spread. The vampire's thirst never truly ended. With no other options left, the villagers resolved to confront the vampire once and for all. Armed with stakes, garlic, and holy water, they gathered under the light of a blood-red moon, preparing to venture to Petar's grave. The forest seemed to whisper around them, the night air heavy with dread. The graveyard was on the outskirts of Kisiljevo, surrounded by thick trees that seemed to block out the moonlight. The villagers made their way to Petter's grave, their hearts pounding in their chests. The earth above his grave was disturbed, and the coffin inside had been unearthed. Petter was gone. Before they could react, the sound of rustling filled the air, and from the shadows, a figure emerged. He was tall, impossibly pale, with eyes that glowed like burning embers. Petter Blagojevich stood before them, his face twisted in a grotesque, predatory grin. His skin, once fair and vibrant, was now ashen, stretched taut over his bones. His clothes hung off him in tatters, and his fangs gleamed in the moonlight. He was no longer the man they had known. He was a monster. Without warning, Petter lunged forward, moving faster than the eye could follow. The villagers tried to defend themselves, but their stakes were no match for the vampire's strength. One by one, they were thrown aside, their screams echoing through the forest. The last to fall was Marco, who, in his final moments, looked up at the creature before him. Petter's eyes locked with his, and for a brief second, Marco saw not a monster, but a man, trapped, cursed, and forever alone. But then, as the vampire's fangs sank deep into his neck, Marco realized the truth. There was no escaping the monster in Kisiljevo. The curse was eternal, and Petter Blagojevich, the vampire of Kisiljevo, would never be defeated. And so, the village fell into ruin. The houses decayed, the fields overgrew, and the very earth seemed to reject the memory of Kisiljevo. But the stories lived on, carried by the wind, warning all who would listen, never venture too far into the forest, and never, ever speak the name of Petter Blagojevich. For the vampire of Kisiljevo still roams the shadows, thirsting for blood, and waiting for the next soul foolish enough to cross his path. The storm was relentless. Emily, Claire, Adam, and Nate were driving along a deserted road, trying to escape the endless rain that poured down in sheets. The wind howled, and the car's headlights barely cut through the mist. The college graduation road trip was supposed to be fun, but now it felt more like an obstacle course. "We're not going to make it to the next town, are we?" Claire asked, her voice a mix of concern and irritation. Nate, the optimist of the group, grinned. "Nah, we'll find a place. There's always somewhere to stop." Adam, who was driving, squinted through the rain. "There's a motel up ahead. Let's just take a break. We'll be fine." Emily, who had been scrolling through her phone, looked up seriously. "I'd rather sleep in the car than stay at some creepy motel." The car rolled to a stop in front of a dilapidated building that looked like it belonged in an old horror movie. The sign above the door was faded, but it still read the shadow inn. "Here we are," Nate said, shrugging. "It's just a stormy night. Let's make the best of it." They reluctantly stepped out of the car, rain pouring down as they hurried inside. The innkeeper was a strange old man who didn't seem to want to be bothered. He looked them up and down and grumbled, "Room 666 is all I got. You want it, you take it, but it's not for the faint of heart." Emily rolled her eyes. "Oh great, room 666. How original. Better than sleeping in the car," Nate said, leading the way to the room. The hallway was dimly lit, the flickering fluorescent lights casting long shadows on the peeling wallpaper. The door to room 666 creaked as Emily turned the knob, and the air inside felt heavy. Dust particles floated in the air like ghosts. The room was small, with a single bed, a nightstand, and a dresser, but something about it felt off. The bedspread was old and stained, and the window didn't seem to let in enough light. The silence in the room was oppressive, as if the walls were hiding something. "Charming," Claire muttered, dropping her bag on the bed. Adam laughed, trying to lighten the mood. It's just an old room, probably haunted by some grumpy ghost who never got his cup of coffee. Nate, always the curious one, moved to the mirror. Hey, anyone else notice how weird the reflections are? Mine's a second behind. Emily glanced over. Seriously? You're seeing things. It's just the lighting. But deep down, something felt wrong. The walls seemed to close in slightly. She stepped into the bathroom, brushing her hair in the mirror. Her reflection, however, didn't move when she did. Instead, it stared back at her, frozen. A chill ran down her spine. Guys? Emily called, her voice shaky. She quickly looked away from the mirror. I think I've had enough of this creepy place. Adam entered and saw her frozen, staring at the mirror. He waved his hand in front of her face. What's up with you? You look like you've seen a ghost. I swear my reflection didn't move with me, Emily whispered. The others gathered around the mirror, but when they checked, everything appeared normal again. It's probably just some weird reflection thing, Adam said with a grin, trying to brush it off. But Emily couldn't shake the feeling that something wasn't right. While the others poked around the room, Claire opened the drawer in the nightstand. Inside, she found an old, decaying journal. Flipping it open, she found strange symbols and scribbled notes about summonings and packs of shadows. Her eyes widened as she read the last entry. The chosen ones arrive at last. Their fate is sealed. Guys, this is messed up, Claire said, her voice trembling. Nate peeked over her shoulder. What is that? A ghost story? Yeah, but it's not fiction. It feels real, Claire responded. She couldn't stop flipping through the pages. As the group gathered around, Emily noticed something even stranger. The journal had their names written on the very first page in what looked like dried blood. As they sat in the room talking about the strange journal, Adam rolled up his sleeve. It's not that bad, guys. Just some old hotel with a weird story. Relax. But when they looked at his arm, something caught their eye, a strange birthmark in the shape of a sigil that matched the symbol in the journal. What the hell? Emily gasped, pointing. Dude, you've had that birthmark your whole life, Nate said, his voice shaking. You've never seen it like this? Adam looked confused. I've had this mark since I was a kid. It's just a weird birthmark. But Emily wasn't convinced. It looks exactly like the one in the journal. What if? Okay, we get it. Adam's part of some ancient curse. Great, Claire cut in sarcastically. She tried to laugh it off, but everyone could tell she was nervous. Trying to prove it was all just a coincidence, Nate moved to the bed and lifted it. Beneath it, he found a ritual dagger, black and old, with strange markings on the blade. It looked like it had been hidden there for years. This is way beyond weird, Nate muttered. Claire immediately grabbed his arm. I don't think we should touch it. Too late, Nate smirked. What do you think I am? Someone who listens to spooky warnings? Suddenly, the room plunged into complete darkness. The lights flickered once, then went out entirely. They heard nothing but the sound of their own breathing. Okay, this is bad. Really bad, Adam said, his voice tight. This is just a power outage, right? Emily whispered. But the room felt different now. The shadows seemed to shift and move. Emily pulled out her phone to check the time. What time is it? She asked, her voice growing more anxious. The clock on the wall showed it was nearly midnight, but when they checked their phones, it was only 8 p.m. We've been here longer than we thought, Adam said, eyes wide. One by one, they began to disappear. Claire vanished into the shadows. Emily screamed her name but found nothing. Then Nate disappeared. Only Adam and Emily remained. Emily's heart raced. We're next, aren't we? Emily finally learned the truth. The room was part of an ancient ritual designed to trap souls for eternity. She was the final piece, a descendant of the ritual's original leader. Only her survival could end the curse, but at what cost? Emily made her choice, but the ending wasn't what anyone expected. She survived, but the others were never seen again. The pact was complete. The room's curse was lifted, but Emily would never be the same. As she drove away, she couldn't shake the feeling that someone was still watching. The laughter of her friends echoed in her mind. She had survived, but at what price? The room was empty now, silent, waiting for the next unsuspecting travelers.